What's up, guys? This previous weekend there was a regional in Germany, Canada, and Australia, and across these three countries, some of the most interesting results happened. While in Brazil just the previous weekend, we saw one of the most concentrated metas ever, of specifically Lugia Vista. This weekend, we miraculously had a highly diverse meta in the decks of top 8. So in this video, I go over what happened, why it happened, and what I think will happen going forward. So enjoy the video, guys. So first we're going to look at the Brisbane regionals and the results that happened there. I'm going to look mostly at the top 8, but I think we can evaluate some trends from outside the top 8 as well. So here are the top 8 decks. So what usually happens in Australia, if you haven't noticed, is all the top players end up playing the same deck. A lot of them do really well, and they all make top 8. And so this time was a little bit different. As you can see, we had a lot of Lugia counters. I don't know how well Durant actually counters Lugia to begin with, but it must have been at least a few on the way there, but the rest of the decks very clearly are hard counters to Lugia. You got Firefi Zekrom with Metacham, which is very good against Lugia. You have Frostmoth Box with Articuno, which is very good against Lugia as well. Obviously, Paralysis, generally very strong against Lugia. And the main strategy that we actually saw this weekend was Paralysis through Articuno, somewhat through Zekrom, through what some of the Lost Box variants were playing, but nothing really outside of that. And then Yveltal Control as well was 2 spots in top 8. That deck is very good against Lugia as well. So, yeah. What I believe happened is that Australians have started to realize what usually happens is that all the players are playing the same deck. And so everybody was trying to counter what they thought the Australians were bringing, which the previous weekend, they're all playing Lugia over in Brazil. And Australians, as you may know from Brazil, had extreme travel times to Australia. Not only did they have long travel times, they also had a time difference. So a lot of them ended up getting back on Thursday, like Wednesday at the earliest. So, they didn't really have a lot of time to come up with a new archetype to play for this event that would be a good play. So I ended up all playing Lugia. If we now look further into the top 16, you can see that a lot of these great players, like Natalie, Brent, who we saw in the top 8 as well, but yeah, Max Prescott, they're all just playing Lugia. And so what happened is there was an incredibly hostile meta for Lugia where all of the, smart players in Australia who weren't in Brazil were playing decks that weren't Lugia, and all the top players who were in Brazil were playing Lugia. So what ended up happening is all the rogue decks shifted to the top, or the rogue decks, the Lugia counter decks shifted to the top. And there was nothing really Australians could do about it. And so we saw a meta that was, not all the names you usually see. You usually see Brent, Natalie, all these players shifting to the top. But these times it was new players, which we love to see. But yeah, that's what happened in Brisbane. Moving on to Stuttgart. So what we ended up seeing in Stuttgart was a meta that only had one Lugia in it, which is like really, really unusual. And it wasn't like there wasn't Lugia at the event. But what ended up happening is the top players in Europe specifically didn't actually end up playing Lugia a whole lot. There was a lot of Lost Box. There was some Lugia. There was definitely some Lugia around that. If you start to look into the top 16 and top 32s, there was like, some good players playing Lugia. But it wasn't as much. And so players like we can see in this top 8, Magnus, Sander, they're not playing Lugia. Sander obviously would never play Lugia, but Magnus as well. He played Lugia last week. He did not play Lugia this week. He played a Palkia deck with Articuno because that deck was, as said earlier, very good at counting Lugia. So, and yeah, we see the Muse start to go to the top as well because what ended up happening is a lot of Europeans just didn't want to play Lugia mirrors. They were scared, especially. I think I was less scared than probably I should have been going into the event, but it was quite terrifying just playing the Lugia Mirror when the most advantage you can gain into it is essentially just, I don't know. There isn't really anything because Tor's list is so solid. If someone's just running Tor's list against you in the mirror, you're basically going to have a 50-50 chance against them, regardless of what you play. There isn't really a huge tag you can play in Lugia to beat Lugia, at least that variant. So, straight away from Lugia, playing Mew seemed like a good idea. People were putting judges in their Mew decks. People were putting a ton of different cards in their Mew decks. Just to give yourself a little bit of an edge in a matchup that's otherwise not that great. In this meta, we saw 3 Meloetta Mews in this top 8 than we did in the other top 8, so we saw the Path Muse, and I do think the Path Muse is a better matchup against Lugia, but it's not as much with the Oranguru, obviously, of Judge, and also Todd's list. Just having 4 research in your deck also just makes you more consistent, way better against Path Mew. And while, yeah, it's terrifying, you can beat it as the Lugia, and it's definitely a matchup that you're not like very extremely confident in as the Path Mew. So we did see the Meloetta Mews. I don't actually fully understand why the Meloetta Mew did so much better than the Path Mighty Mew, because I do think the Path Mighty Mew is, in my opinion, the better deck right now. Um, they were up there. Maybe it was in some part due to the Palkias, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't know. But yeah. And yeah, we end up seeing in this top eight, we see Mateus win, and this is another thing I wanted to talk about. Vikavolt, it's one of those decks that has sort of a middling um, Lugia matchup. It's not the best, it's not the worst. You definitely have some counterplay against them. They have some counterplay against you, which is taking prizes fast. Um, but yeah, you can slow him down early, and sometimes that'll win you the game. And Vikavolt Palkia isn't something we haven't seen before. We got top 8 at the last regionals that we had in Europe. So definitely not an unknown deck here, and taking down the entire tournament. While it's definitely surprising, it definitely wasn't a deck that a lot of people were thinking about. I think it's an underrated and like pretty powerful deck in general. So I think we'll see more of it from now on as well. I'm starting to think about the future, and I think that these Mewtwo decks, we saw Sanders Mewtwo Curlier Serena deck. That deck is very very cool. Very consistent deck. It was just well constructed. Sanders said that he only had a day and a half to make it, so did a good job on that one. And I think we'll start to look at Toronto, which also had Mewtwo variants. Mewtwo is going to be something that we're going to see a lot more going forward. As people start to innovate and start to realize that, because Mewtwo beats Lost Box on its own, Mewtwo gives you a hard win against Lost Box. You don't have to play anything else. So having that and then being able to build the rest of your deck around beating the two matchups Lugia and Mew, you have a lot of space to do that, and it's not that hard to do that with simply a control deck. So, yeah. Moving on to Toronto. Now, as we start to look at the Toronto top 8, we've got a few interesting things here. So we've got two main sort of groups of decks. We have the two Lost Boxes and the two Lugias, which are both interesting, and those lists are very interesting and something I think we're going to that we should get into further into those. But looking at this top 8 in totality, the Mewtwo was able to win, which obviously control decks barely win events. This is definitely an outlier in that regard. But I think Mewtwo was a really, really good call for this weekend. And I think getting rewarded at winning the tournament isn't unusual at all. I think it was definitely positioned to just straight up win this tournament, and that's what happened. So, yeah, as I said earlier, Mewtwo, like, you beat Lost Box, and as long as you beat your deck, which in this case was done with the Yveltal package, to beat Lugia, Mew, and that's about it. The Mewtwo also beats Lost Box. There's a lot of things that Mewtwo on its own does, and now it has V-Guard Energy as well, which helps it a little bit. So, yeah, that's basically what's going on with Mewtwo. And that's why it won. And I think it's pretty usual that it's won. Also, Arceus Duraludon getting second, not that unusual either, as Americans seem to always have one Arceus deck at really high placings in these tournaments, and Duraludon is definitely the one to do it in this format. Terrifying as a Lugia player. You can sometimes just go second and instantly, like, not instantly lose, but they just full set up, you go second, they've turned to mustard you, and they've got two Duraludons in play, and the game's already over. So, that could happen. And it's absolutely terrifying. But I think the more interesting thing about Toronto top 8 is I think this really shows us what we're looking forward to in the meta in the future. And I think the main thing about this, and we're going to start to look at Limitless now, is Isaiah Bradner's list. And Isaiah Bradner's list was kind of crazy. Because he had the Espeon, the Espeon Vmax. I think this is how the Lugia is going to structure going forward. While this is going to give you a disadvantage in the mirror specifically, the Espeon Vmax is an incredibly strong card against literally any counter. Yveltal, Articuno, literally anything that paralyzes. It has some things against Lost Box, gives you some benefits. You can just attach an energy to your your Manaphy, and then it can't be killed by Sableye anymore. There's just so much going on with its Espeon Vmax that if you can build a list that gets it into play like incredibly consistently, this deck played 15 energy, which is like fine. It's got all the counts of cards that you want. It's cut back on like the extra Lugia V-Star and some other stuff, but yeah, just literally just including that 1/1 line makes a huge difference to this deck. And I think that like we're gonna start to see counters to Espeon VMAX. I think that Yveltal is gonna have to run Path because Espeon VMAX, the issue with it is that Path hard counters it. But if they're not running Path, then cannot counter it. So yeah. I think that we're definitely gonna see new control decks because control has an incredibly good place in this meta. But I don't know. I think it's going to definitely have to come in a different form at the next tournament to beat Lugia. And I think Lugia is going to come back to being a really strong deck with the inclusion of the Espeon Vmax because I think this is incredibly smart. And I think it's going to pick up a lot of steam after this event going into if you're going to Arlington. Expect the card, play the card maybe. Consider it at the very least. And the last thing to think about is the Lost Zone decks. They were running Zekrom to paralyze Lugias. Probably thought they wanted a better Lugia matchup. Um, but I don't have like Metacham or anything to supplement the Zekrom. They have Sableye, which is enough. You put extra damage, you'll be fine. They skip an attack. They were all the Lugia decks almost were running Birdkeeper this event. I was myself. A lot of them were. So it was paralysis was definitely on people's radars, but yeah, the Zekrom's still doing well in Caleb and Grant's decks in top 8. So that's gonna be it for the video, guys. That's all I got for today. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed watching. So yeah, and I'll see you guys in the next one.